While the Final Fantasy X-2 speedrun is an exciting and deep game in its own right, the community interestingly contains a wide variety of runners from a lot of other Final Fantasy speedrun communities. Given its relatively short length, coming in at around 2 to 3 hours, as well as the inbuilt ability to skip most cutscenes, the run is mostly all action with downtime being quite scarce. The game itself is also fairly straightforward to learn, making for a perfect, shorter JRPG speedrun, or potentially a side game for a longer speedrun. If you look at the speedrun.com leaderboards, you'll almost certainly find one of your favorite runners from another mainline Final Fantasy game, though you'll notice a distinct lack of runners in the JP category. I find this quite strange, as the two versions are wildly different, and the JP category in particular is an action-packed run that takes full advantage of the differences between the JP and international releases. The two main versions I'll be focusing on in this video are the JP and NA releases for the PS2. The HD version that's around these days is nearly identical to the NA version, with a few exclusive features such as Creature Creator and the Final Mission minigame that were previously exclusive. As far as casually, the difference between the JP and international releases are actually quite minor. There are some differences in the effects of accessories, and in NA for example, the White Mage class starts with the Cure ability already learned, and there are some other changes that really bear no effect on the run. However, the most major change is the accessory Catnip. In the NA release, this accessory equips Auto Berserk and Auto Slow on the wearer, and is acquired through an optional minigame. In the JP release, however, Catnip is a missable accessory that is acquired during a compulsory minigame, but more on that later. Across the JP and NA versions, the start of the speedrun is mostly the same. The game features a unique active time battle system, which allows you to change your character classes mid-battle, and as far as Final Fantasy goes, has a unique feature where when your party attacks an enemy, they actually take some hit stun. For a lot of the early game bosses, runners will use the Thief Dress Sphere, as their attack animation actually contains multiple hits, which means with some good timing and good pacing of your attacks, a lot of early game bosses can actually be stun locked and not even get the opportunity to have a single turn. Of course, a staple of the Final Fantasy series is random encounters. However, in the Final Fantasy X-2 speedrun, runners will detour to the Calm Lands as soon as the game allows them, as they can pick up the Charm Bangle, an accessory which prevents all random encounters and is surprisingly cheap to purchase. They'll keep it equipped for the remainder of the run to avoid random encounters entirely. Runners will progress through the main story, stun-locking bosses and listening to a fantastic soundtrack along the way, meeting some old friends too. After things at Bethesda wrapped up, it's time for the Musicians minigame. If you've played the game casually, you may not even remember this minigame, but as a compulsory minigame, speedrunners are very much familiar with it. The general idea of this minigame is that the musicians are trying to get to the roof, but for some reason we need to move them there ourselves, so we stuff them in this elevator and send them on their way up. However, if we compare the screens for the JP and NA versions, you'll notice that Tobli is running around, and we can move him in the same way. While it's difficult, as Tobli has an aversion to sitting still, we can walk him into the elevator in the same way as the other musicians, and here is where we get Catnip. But why is Catnip so important? Why is Berserk and Slow so important to have? That's the last major difference between JP and NA that I neglected to mention earlier. In the JP version, Catnip doesn't give Berserk or Slow. Instead, when equipped to a character who is below 20% health, Catnip will cause all healing to heal for 9,999 health, and all damage values to hit for 9,999, which means we can do this. From the mid-game onwards, the strategy changes dramatically. In the NA version, we typically use magic attacks as Pain and a self-destruct ability with the Dark Knight Dress Sphere to chunk bosses' health for around 20k at the cost of 2 of our party members, leaving Pain alive to win the fight. However, the primary strategy in JP is to have your own party members attack Yuna to put her in critical health, and then use either a grenade, an AoE spell, or Yuna's rapid-fire gunshot ability that's available in the Gunner class. While at first this strategy might seem trivial or easy, a runner will always need to account for the fact that Yuna needs to be in critical health for this to work. meaning that in addition to her own party members, if the enemies also focus their attacks on Yuna, she'll almost certainly die, as the party is not prepared to defend against a lot of these bosses. This is a very high risk, high reward strategy, and it gets extremely tense in the late game. Far and away the most exciting part of the speedrun, at least for me, is Chapter 5, a boss rush of sorts and our last leg of the game. You start this chapter at full health, so of course against the Dark Shiva fight, we need to drop Yuna's health once more and take her out with Yuna's Trigger Happy ability. But this poses an interesting problem in the speedrun that's rooted in a core mechanic of Final Fantasy X and X-2, the save sphere. To save your progress in this game, you interact with these spheres. However, even touching this sphere restores your party's HP and MP fully. Typically, you won't want to save your progress in a speedrun anyway, as taking the time to save, dying to a boss, and then reloading the save file to get back to the point where you died takes so long that your odds of a high level time are just about out the window anyway. But if you're learning or have a huge lead on your own PB and want to secure it, or in a marathon setting, you really can't save your progress. The upcoming bosses simply do not leave you with much of an opportunity to set Yuna's health to critical again. The Dark Major Sisters is our next fight, and it's quite scary. There are 3 enemies and they each have over 10,000 health. We need to spend several turns taking them down, leaving them with a few opportunities to target Yuna if you do get unlucky. However, as Yuna's already in critical health, the strategy is much of the same, tossing grenades and shooting the beefier sisters, doing your best to protect Yuna. Dark Anima is one of our last really straightforward fights. Given that Yuna is already in critical health and we got an accessory earlier that gives her the first turn in every fight, we can take down Anima quite quickly. At this point in the NA version, there's a musical minigame where you need to follow a specific path in order to remove this barrier here. If you try and walk through this barrier, you're forced to fight Azitahaka, a boss that was intentionally made to be so strong that it would effectively force players to participate in this minigame. It has 140,000 HP, over 5 times the health of the game's final boss. However, with 2 reps of Yuna's Trigger Happy ability, and praying that Yuna doesn't get targeted, we can defeat Azitahaka quite quickly and bypass that minigame entirely. It's a lot faster. After this, the party takes on Vegnagun, a large enemy with multiple body parts that we have to take out in individual fights, starting with its tail, which is really straightforward, again given that Yuna is already in crit health, and there's only one target for this boss. Vegnagun's leg is a tricky fight. You'll need to shoot the main part of the leg no more than 2 times, as dealing any excess damage to this boss will trigger a counter attack and wipe the party, which ends your run then and there. Vegnagun's head is another tricky fight with multiple targets and opportunities for the boss to target Yuna. However, with good execution, you can avoid its attacks and take out the boss with grenades and a few gunshots. Here we head into the final boss, Shuyun. Unfortunately for us, the game will automatically heal the party, so we'll need to drop Yuna's health one final time and take out Shuyun with the Trigger Happy ability to close out the run. There's obviously a lot more to this run, as I'm just doing a very brief overview of it, but why is it so underplayed? With such an interesting run that takes full advantage of the unique aspect to this version, why does it have such a lack of players? I reached out to various members of the community, some of which have run the JP version and some who haven't, to learn more about their experience with the Final Fantasy X-2 speedrun and why they think there's less activity in the JP category. Let's hear their thoughts.
Well, to be fair, I never planned to get into speedrunning. Long story short, I'm the main rerouter of the 10 to 100% category. I found a strat where the speedrun can beat Tremor on the first try every time and joined the community to share my strats. Nowadays we don't even have to fight Tremor anymore.
It is my all-time favorite childhood video game. I loved 10, but, you know, 10-2, I don't know, something just resonated with me when I was a kid.
Well, I started streaming on Twitch in 2011, and I was pretty much just speedrunning FF10 at the time. But I guess I kind of got maybe burned out on FF10 speedrunning, understandably, so I wanted to look for another speedrun to do. Well, 10.2 is the logical next place to go.
My favorite category is 100%. I put a lot of work rerouting the category and optimizing the game. It was the first speedrun I did. I like that it's not just running from one boss fight to the next, but instead we have many different minigames and side quests we do, and we visit every area in the game, seeing a change from chapter to chapter.
My favorite category to run is JP because you use only Earinor, Riku, and Pain, that's what I didn't like about Any% in the Any% PC version of the category. But the JP run, Earinor is your glass cannon, and I just love that about her. I love that we get to use the gun address sphere. I love that we get to just pull out our guns and just.
I think the most enjoyable thing in the JP version is the fact that you get catnip pretty early in the game and that you can one-shot almost every encounter.
In many ways, the run is still not 100% solved, so there's so much that we can still learn and so much that we can, I think, find out from playing this category more and kind of delving into it more.
Having catnip, having the run just be easier overall. Like it's not easy to get a good time, but it's a much easier run to actually finish.
The least enjoyable thing is probably that your run can end almost everywhere, especially in your first few runs. To get catnip, you have to push Tobli into the elevator at the start of chapter 2 before you push the other musicians, which is already a minigame from hell, but pushing Tobli is another kind of evil.
Probably the RNG. Again, it's just one of those things that you'll get it in most. Hello, baby. Hello. You'll get it in most Final Fantasy runs. There is an element of RNG to any run. However, in the case of 10.2, obviously this comes up in mini-games as opposed to encounters, whereas encounters, obviously, you can do something about that. Mini-games, we don't really know what we can do about that at this current point in time.
So there's lots of times where there's some text where if you try to skip it too early, that it just will not let you skip it. Both the NA version of FF10 and the Japanese version of 10.2 have the same both loading delay and text lock problems.
I think that that's largely due to accessibility of JP consoles and just possibly that the accessibility of the language as well. I think also a lot of people mistakenly think that it's very solved and that we can't do any better than we are. But I think a lot of people accept Kara's run as the best run that you could possibly get. And I think it is a very, very good run, don't get me wrong. However, I think that there is more that we can do to learn about this run. So
the answer to that would just be accessibility. Like, not many people outside of Japan have Japanese PS2s.
You need a JP copy of the game and a PS2 to run it. I guess the accessibility with the HD remastered version for PC is much higher in terms of streaming, since you also don't need a capture card.
Thank you to these runners who took the time out of their day to help with this video, and thank you to these runners for giving me permission to use their footage for various parts of the video. I'll make sure to include appropriate links for anyone who has been featured in this video if you do happen to see anything that you like and want to follow for more. Additionally, if you're interested at all in giving the speedrun a go for any category, the community is extremely welcoming, and they have a variety of guides readily available for newcomers to get their start. The Discord and speedrun.com links will be in the description, as well as Twitch and other social media links for myself. Thank you for watching.